welcome to everybody who's coming on in for this talk. We're all really excited. This is, you may probably know that this is one of the regular series that we co-host with Sustainable Stow. We do have every month the topic will be posted on our social media. You can register ahead of time, and we're recorded. And so if you are unable to attend one that you're really interested in, it will be available on Stow TV after the fact. Rick, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the guest when you're ready.
Great. And I want to thank Randall Library for hosting this. And if you're inspired and you haven't, for some reason, read Diet for a Small Planet in its 50 years of existence, you can go get a copy at the library. I know I got one when I was in graduate school in the early 70s. And it was enlightening. Let me say that. So I could almost ask for a show of hands if there's anybody here who hasn't heard of Frances Moore Lappé. I mean, as I say, I've known her since I was just barely out of undergraduate. I've known of her work. And so now she's recently released the 50th anniversary edition of Diet for a Small Planet. And if you don't own a copy already, you might want to pick one up or go to the library and get one. Not many authors get to release a 50th anniversary edition of a perennial bestseller. So that's pretty amazing. Meanwhile, that's not the only thing she works and writes about. She's been very concerned for years about democracy, and with her daughter, Anna, just completed a trip to India where where Anna is working on the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, a new organization. There's several books on democracy by Frankie. I've heard her talk about them, and I can't think of a better, if it wasn't we were talking about food tonight, we should be talking about democracy, because there's so much urgent need for us to be alert and awake to any threats that may be ongoing to democracy. So anyways, tonight it's Diet for a Small Planet, mostly, though I have a feeling Frankie may slip in a few remarks on other related topics near and dear to her heart. So Frankie is coming to us from Cambridge. And thank you. I'm very glad to have you with us as our guest tonight.
Thank you. So, shall I begin?
You should begin. Yeah, I'm afraid I could spend the next 5 minutes going through your resume for people, but I won't.
I just want to clarify on that trip to India that I mentioned. That was as we were writing the book that we wrote together in 2000. It's called Hope's Edge, and we decided, my daughter and I, that we would interview the people pushing forward the edge of hope, the rest of us. And so that was our journey in 5 continents. It was life-changing. So Hope's Edge. So I shall begin with a real expression of my deep gratitude for this invitation. I was very touched to be invited, and as you must know, libraries have a very special place, and even in the speech I'm about to begin. So I want to celebrate the 40 years and be part of it. Yay, 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 40 more. So I want to start with the irony of my beginning, and that is, as a child, I grew up in a city whose nickname was Cowtown. I think that's pretty funny. Fort Worth, Texas. And the smell of the stockyards was never very far from me. And so from there, though, I realized that When I graduated from college, I really did not know my pathway. I was really searching, really searching. And at that time, any of you who were readers then, Paul Ehrlich's book, Standard Professor, Paul Ehrlich wrote the book, The Population Bomb. And everybody was saying, oh my gosh, big world problem is scarcity. There's not enough. And my girlfriends were saying, I can't have children. There's not enough food. And my youthful light bulb went on, and I thought, food, yes, we can't live without that. That if I could just understand why hunger in the world, that would give me direction. And so I said, okay, I'm going to find out if Professor Ehrlich is correct. And guess where I went? To the library. And guess what I found? A very friendly, well, more than one librarian. I wish I never got to thank them. I realized years later that they were gone by the time I wanted to get back to that library and thank them. But they literally took me from stack to stack with my dad's slide rule. My generation may know what that is. And I literally did put two and two together. And I said, what? There's more than enough to feed us all. Food is plentiful, and we are the big scarcity making machine. And so I, I, uh, I, that became the theme song. I wanted to explain there's plenty. And today, just to give you one, one number to that, that per person, the food supply, the calorie supply is a third greater than it was when I started on my path. And that it's more than enough food to make us all chubby, more than enough calories in the world produced. But unfortunately, this fixation on production itself, on how much is produced, it continued. And so it's taken us globally to this point that we have these enormous increase in calories per capita, up by about a quarter. But there's still incredible hunger in the world, of course. And so I'm going to organize my talk by 5 crises, I call them crises, and then where do we go with, where do we go? How do they weave together? And so today, still today, almost 350 million people, more than the US population, don't get enough to eat, right? So we still have this enormous problem amidst plenty. And they come, to about 1 in 3 people on Earth. So this is profound shock for someone who spent her life, trying to get to the roots of hunger, and here it is. And so this is the first crisis then, that in some ways for me, the most heartbreaking measure of the continuing hunger crisis is that 1 out of every child below the age of 5 is actually today is actually physically stunted by malnutrition. And stunting is not just being short for your age. It's has lifelong negative consequences. So that is one stat I wanted to definitely leave you with. And here at home, as of 2022, a quarter of Americans are food insecure. So crisis 1 is that definition of scarcity, we're still in it, and yet there's more than enough for all of us. Crisis 2 is that the frame of there's not enough led to vast waste and destruction. And that waste is what first woke me up. Any of you familiar with Diet for a Small Planet, you probably remember, well, the statistic that most rocked my boat was that we use about 80% of all agricultural land for either growing crops to feed to animals or for grazing animals, 80%. And livestock give us back 18%. So that huge built-in waste was like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem very bright for the brightest species, right? So that really woke me up. And although as a Texas kid, to think that those beef and those feedlots were actually the least efficient way to feed ourselves. Cattle consume about 25 calories of feed to give us 1 calorie of beef. So I think of us as kind of the great shrinking machine. And so given all of this, here, my new ID, you know, I have long been called a vegetarian, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. But recently, when I started thinking of all of the planetary impacts of our diet, which I'm going to be going into now, I realized that maybe, what do you think? Maybe I should start calling my approach to eating being a planetarian, that we are aligning with the whole earth. And maybe that could be more inclusive. And so that's really one of the things I hope to leave you with, that idea. And so that then is that great shrinking machine was the second sort of false frame and the great wake up for me. And then the third was that that our false frame then generated this incredible carbon dependent food system that has made food and ag a contributor of 37% of greenhouse gas emissions, something on that order. And so that I could never have imagined as a 23, whatever I was then, early 20s. And livestock contribute more than its fair share of that harm, you know, in terms of our food system. You know, cattle emit methane, I'm sure many of you know. And not many of us do know, however, that many of you may, but that livestock per unit is 80 times, has 80 times the climate impact of carbon dioxide. So cattle, that's one way that cattle are this enormous contributor to climate change. And that's the third. And then the fourth, it's really, really short, but we can't forget it because we often don't mention it. And that is this chemical dependent, you know, this wasteful and climate destructive agriculture also destroys life. That directly by the people who grow it are in those fields, that every year, I recently read the estimate, every year worldwide, that 44% of farm workers are sickened by pesticides. Every year that 44% of farm workers sickened. And that just breaks my heart. Absolutely. So that's the fourth. And then the fifth aspect of what I've learned over these years is water. How much water this grain-fed, meat-centered, chemical-dependent agriculture takes, and how, again, livestock plays such a big part of that. So water degradation is something that a lot of Americans aren't really aware of, that the nitrogen and phosphorus that is used in fertilizers, it runs, you know, into the Mississippi River. And Dr. Galloway, you can look him up, James Galloway is the one who really awakened me to this and others to this, that he estimates that these fertilizers then from Midwest farms, they have created an oceanic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that's the size of the combination of Delaware and New Jersey from that runoff from the fields, a lot of that for our meat-centered diet. And there are now 400 such dead zones around the world, and they are harming sea life and they are harming coral reefs. So that water degradation. But tonight, I really want to, those then are the 5 crises that I've been, and I'm sure there are others that you could name that have motivated me and I try to keep somewhat up to date on. But we want tonight to celebrate sustainability. And we want to be energetic into the turning of this tide, right? Put our great energy into it. So that's what I've tried to do is to take the power of hope, that hope is not for wimps. So hope is something that you actually can only have if you do something, because then you think, oh yeah, if I can do it, other people can. So I want to then turn to solutions as our choice. That if we consumed only the protein our bodies can use, that alone would cut, say, nitrogen pollution by 40%. And so, of course, even bigger, as you know, is cutting down on our flights and buying our green auto. But shifting toward plant-based diets could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by as much as 70% from agriculture by 2050. So that is huge. And there's professors in the Midwest. Oh gosh, where are they? Anyway, really people I have learned a lot from, that they have calculated that if we just turn the country toward a Mediterranean diet, and that is sideline meat, if we just did that, put plants at the center, that would be the equivalent of cutting greenhouse gas emissions as much as getting all vehicles and airplanes, etc., off the road, out of the skies. That would be huge, just getting there. So, and then there, of course, is the biodiversity question. And that wasn't on my radar when I first began, but as you know, in Diet for a Small Planet, since Diet for a Small Planet, many of you may know that we've lost almost 70% of our wildlife populations. And scientists tell us that livestock production is a way that humans that we have sped it. So this is another action that we can take to, be part of the solution, that as we eat a plant-centered diet, we are putting less pressure on this destruction of the forest, of which the Amazon forest, 80% of its deforestation has been conversion to pastures and feed for livestock. And so that really is, so central, is that moving to this plant-centered eating, we can reduce this great loss of biodiversity, and that is really motivating. And and the other, I think, really interesting part then about the water piece that I should have mentioned is that that producing livestock feed uses about 41% of all water in agriculture, and that it takes about 1,800 gallons to produce 1 pound of beef, so that water shift is huge. And now I want to turn to the question of human health in all of this. And when I began, I didn't begin to understand the threat that red meat posed to our health. And now, of course, processed food. But Americans make up about 4% of the world's population, but we consume 1/5 of the world's beef, which is the food that has the most health risks involved in it. Most people don't know that in 2015, the World Health Organization declared red meat a probable carcinogen, and processed meat a carcinogen. And when I mentioned that during my tour, my interviews for Diet for a Small Planet 50th anniversary, the interviewer for NPR didn't believe me. He said, no, World Health Organization did that? Can't be. I would have heard of it, because he's really into food. And so he made me get on the computer and show him the World Health Organization data. And so I just want to reshare that, because it is so shocking that we don't realize, and that World Health Organization. And when you think we give our little kids, what do we give them? Hot dogs, and bologna? That is the form of meat that has been shown definitely to be carcinogenic. So health is a key factor then that I didn't begin to understand when I was just caught up in the question of production and waste. And so I've also learned that meat eating is now a risk factor in diabetes. Nor did I predict, that, as I mentioned, that this explosion of this huge change in diet would come about, that we are more and more dependent on ultra-processed food. That was not nearly the situation when I wrote Diet for a Small Planet, so I really wasn't tuned into it. And that Americans now get about 60% of our calories from ultra-processed foods. And not only do they, you probably know a lot of this, but that 60% of our calories, but that they are truly not good for us in more ways than one. So this is really the health message and how this is then going abroad. And that, you know, I just want us to grasp that the corporate concentrated processed food industry that is hurting us is also penetrating into the global South, where Anna and I, when we visited India for our book, there were big stands of eucalyptus trees painted with Pepsi signs, you know, and we talked to a doctor, and he said, yes, you know, when, you know, 20 years ago, I treated people for lack of calories. Today, it's diabetes that is killing people because of this ultra processed food is being pushed throughout the world. Actually, I just saw here that Coca-Cola has 900 bottling plants worldwide. So that's another piece of the story. And that helps us, you know, to understand, helps us to understand now this. I hope that I can still be, I am still shocked to tell you this number, and I hope others are too, because I didn't realize it was this bad, but that that we rank in terms of life expectancy now, and I think that many of us would agree that our degraded diet is part of this, that our life expectancy is ranked 46th in the world now between Estonia and Panama. So this is, you know, sort of the good news, bad news, and I've told you a lot of how things have intensified in ways that I could never have imagined. But we are problem solvers. And so this, I want to return then to this theme of what a plant-centered diet and can do for us, and that it can even reverse cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And I didn't know that it could actually make that difference for a long time. And so now I think we humans really take our cues from each other. We look to others for possibility. So I just want to mention a few things that most motivate me in sense of possibility. And that 5 diverse nations, Sweden, Netherlands, UK, Brazil, China, have stepped up with public health guidelines calling for more plants, less meat, more plants, less meat, more plants, less meat. And you can find that on myplateplanet.org. And the Netherlands, 6 years ago, there was a government advisory board that led the whole country to begin to reduce its meat consumption based on concern about the greenhouse gas emissions that a meat-centered diet emits. And 72% of the Dutch are into it and just eat. They try to limit 72% say they're trying to limit their intake to just a couple of servings a week. And so that's a big example of what's possible. Polls report that Swedes are also choosing to eat vegetarian up to 4 times per week, and all the polls there show. And here in the US, that there's been a 20% increase in people turning to a flexitarian diet. I think you probably know what that means more than I do, but it's not strictly vegetarian, but it's people who are really adding the plants into their diets. And so I really want then to continue with solutions to name the deeper root cause that we can be addressing as we are solutionarians. And that, of course, is beneath it all is who is making these decisions, these policy decisions that have so concentrated control in our food industry and control the advertising that still degrades our diet. And so that takes us then to democracy. And that's so much of my last 20 years. because think about it, nobody chooses to go hungry, and nobody chooses to eat a diet that that if they knew how damaging it was. And so if democracy means real choice, then what I've been telling you and what you know about our diet is is a profound reflection of the scarcity of democracy. And so I underscore that with something that would shock most people. I'd be curious if you are, but Freedom House, founded by Eleanor Roosevelt, ranks democracies worldwide. And for a number of years, this organization has ranked the United States 60th. We are between Panama and Samoa. And I think, we're the best can really be an obstacle. And if we can incorporate that in our gut, that we little humility could be a good thing for our country in going towards solutions. And most of our peer countries are in, roughly in almost all of our what we think of as our peer countries are in the top 20, 25 or so. So, it's no surprise then too, speaking of our rankings, that in global sustainability index, we rank between Cuba and Bulgaria. We rank 41st. And so, yes, sustainability depends on a democracy. And so we have to then realize that none of us would choose a world that was so much destruction and waste and loss and pain if we felt that we really had a voice. And since we are creatures of the mind, we filter our vision through these culturally determined filters and still hold to the idea that we're the best we can do in democracy. And that is, if we're the best, then where is the hope? So that I think we should drop the idea of seeing is believing and really incorporate the idea that believing is seeing, and that we believed that we were the best for so long, and that we had the top democracy that interfered with us really going to the roots of the destruction that I identified in these, what I call these 5 crises. So the sad part is that our filter has been through this kind of magical thinking that a market works on its own, this magic of the market, Ronald Reagan called it, to sort out outcomes that work best because we humans are incapable of cooperating to come up with solutions. And so a lot of what I'm hoping that I can do is to show people that that by freeing us from the myth that we've got the best democracy, or that a market is fair, and show that our market has ended up with economic inequality greater than in over 120 countries, or roughly like that. I mean, we're one of the very most extreme, that we can help people shed that. And that is part of the solution, that we shed this mythology around a market that works to serve us all. And we really tell our friends and neighbors that in gentle ways, that the good news is that then we can learn from so many, as I was mentioning, these other peer countries who are making changes, that the worst would be if we were the best. And so we help our friends and neighbors understand that a lot of what we're experiencing today is because our democracy has been so corrupted by this concentrated wealth, by lobbyists answering to corporate agribusiness, etc. And so as we begin to see that democracy has to be answering to us, and we change the rules to keep money out of the political system. And there are a lot of lessons in the book I'm working on now about how they're doing that in other countries, and how this dependency on private wealth to run our, that's just not the norm in the countries that we most admire. So, and we also share, I think a lot of us, if we think about it, that beyond the physical, beyond just the healthy diet that you all stand for, and the biological diversity, that we all want to thrive, that human beings have really three deep needs. And I think a lot of our friends and neighbors would identify with what I'm about to say, that we need a sense of agency, that to know that we count. We need to know that our lives have meaning beyond just our own survival, and that that we have and are connected to others. We're not alone. And so what I feel that you all are doing is meeting people's need for power, meaning, and connection through this kind of learning, and through, oh, you mean I can make choices that are going to ripple out? You mean I can share this with friends that will help give them that power? So power, meaning, and connection. And that, I believe, then is the key then, because if we don't feel that, then what do? We become the blamers that you see today, oh, it's the immigrants, or it's, whoever. And if people feel a sense of dignity and know that they're taking in charge of my life, they don't have to do that othering. They don't have to do that blaming. They can go to root causes and say, hey, I'm going to name this corporation, but it's not because of evil people. It's, I love, who is that? I wanted to quote, anyway, I'm going to quote him and tell you, but some are guilty, but we're all responsible. And so that's really our message, that yes, the corporate junk food makers, and there's a level of guilt there, but to the extent that we're part of it, we're all responsible. And I just love that idea. Some are guilty, but we're all responsible. And so, and that only, democracy really can meet these deep needs for power, meaning, and connection in a positive way. And if they're not met positive, then sure, a terrorist group can meet them, Al Qaeda can meet them negatively, but only democracy can offer power, meaning, connection that serves our souls in a positive way. And so, what is then the essence of democracy? I would say simply three things. I love freedom. Three things I can remember. It's the dispersion of power. It's transparency in public relations, so that we know what's happening, and it's really those two things, and really this idea of mutual accountability, that is beyond the blaming culture, and that would take us all then to this new place, that we as regular citizens, this is not something separate in our lives to be an active citizen. This is not a dull duty that we, put on our shoulders, but we find ways to find power, meaning, and connection through becoming more active in helping to change the rules that created this nightmare that we're still struggling with. And so I think that any way that we can spread the word about what I'm talking about to develop a truly united democracy movement, and the environmental movement, it's been very much part of that sustainability movement, and then to make it more visible, and a life-changing moment for me is, and I don't want to put myself like I can, anyway, I'll just say what I'm going to say, but in 2016, there was a march on Washington from Philadelphia of 100 miles for voting rights. And I didn't think I could walk 10 miles. And I thought they'd have to cart off this little old lady, and it would be so embarrassing. But I signed up and I did it. I walked 100 miles, met so many amazing people, sat in on the Capitol steps, and I've got chills telling you about this. And there was one moment I'll never forget, because one of us was dressed up as the Statue of Liberty for this sitting on the steps. And I have a picture of her being taken away by the police in cuffs, the Statue of Liberty being handcuffed and taken away. But my point is that I met former soldiers, I met all teenagers from California, all kinds of people. So when we step out of our usual circles and do something that we thought we could not do, and again, I don't want to brag about it, but I had the opportunity, and I just said, okay, I'm going to do it. And anyway, but it was life-changing. So when you see these opportunities, and maybe it's just speaking up in a meeting, I don't know you, but I get I get fluttery, if I have to stand up when nobody's, expected me, or well, even when they do. but to whatever it is, and share these stories. And the goal then is not to shame others, but to inspire others, to motivate others. Oh, if she could do it, maybe I could too, right? And so I really do want to emphasize that the theme of my life is that hope is not escapism. Hope is power. Hope is power, that people need hope to engage and take risks. And so that is really so freeing for me, the sense of possibility, that we don't have to be optimists. That's too hard. It's too hard with all we know about things going down in our world. All we have to know is that it is possible that that all of our actions could trigger that one, then that one, then that one. We never know. We never know the ripples that our actions will make. So I don't call myself an optimist. I call myself a possibilist. And it's a radically different message for me. And that I was looking here at my notes and remembering the smile of the late philosopher Hans-Peter Dürer in Germany. And a party there, he said, Frankie, I said something silly. He said, don't you know, in biological systems, there are no parts, there are only participants. And I just love that idea that, that we are all connected and all therefore changing each other moment to moment. So I'll just end with a couple of cool stories. How am I doing on time? Wrapping up. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Jules Preddy. I don't know if you know of his work, but he took it upon himself to scour the world to identify how many grassroots sustainable groups were emerging worldwide, and that he has identified 8.5 million what he called intentionally formed collaborative groups sustaining sustainable farming and forestry in self-organizing communities, almost half of them in low-income countries. And that's not a small number. And together they are reviving the land, the area the size of India, according to Jules Preddy. So look up Jules Preddy. And then I'll jump to Brazil for another quick story. Anne and I went there when we wrote our book, Hope's Edge. And in Brazil, as you know, land is controlled by a tiny elite. And we were so impressed to meet the farmers of the landless workers movement who have now risked their lives to gain access and to nearly 18 million acres of land and are growing food sustainably and feeding 70,000 families organically, cooperatively. So these are stories of possibility. And I'll just end with one more, a quick one. When also in India, I went to visit a group I'd heard about called the Deccan Development Society. I was over there for a climate conference. And I said, okay, I'm going to get in the cab. I had no idea what I would find, right? And I went out to this little village, the Deccan Development Society, and they sat in this little circle on a mat in their beautiful saris. And this is their story. 20 years ago, we were all hungry in our village. And we women, we had no voice. We had no voice with our husbands, no voice in the community. And we went hungry. And then we decided, we women, that after our children were in bed at night, we would meet in one, and we'd go into different our little shacks, really. And we'd meet, and then we'd each put in a little bit of money and collect it. And then one of us would buy a little bit of land and start growing multiple healthy crops. And then the next person and the next person, it would grow. And so the Deccan Development Society now has gone to, I believe, 50 villages. It's been a leader worldwide, gone to teach people in South Africa. And they said to me that night, there is no hunger in our village. And the beaming, incredible pride. And so I got up and I was just overwhelmed. And oh, good for you, Frankie, for showing up here. And oh, this is amazing. I started walking out of the village and I heard these footsteps behind me. I turned around and there they were chasing after me. And they said, oh, we forgot to tell you. We forgot to tell you the most important thing. And I said, what? And they said, yes, the most important thing is that we found our courage. The most important thing. And I think that is every day a message from me that doing what we could not do, we thought we could not, but then finding others, because we do find our courage together. And so now I could go on and on. Let's see, I'm going to wrap up here. So this journey of half a century, more than that now, has led me to this conclusion. That we humans are good enough. We are good enough to do this. So what's our problem? In some ways, is that we are too social. We are too much pack animals. We go along because we want to stay in the pack. And that's where the courage comes from. And ironically, we have to break, we have to challenge our socialized nature, in order to find our courage to make deep change. And that really is the challenge, that it's thinking of courage in this new way of doing what we thought we could not do. And I love Eleanor Roosevelt. I have her quote on my desk in my office: do one thing every day that scares you. I can't say I follow Eleanor every day, but I try. So we're not packed. We're not trapped in this social nature, because we can choose our friends, choose a friend who is more courageous than you are, and challenge each other, and you will become more gutsy yourself. And that is certain. And the other thing is certain, is that we will never know the full ripples of our work. We will never know, but we do know that someone is always watching. And as Hans Peter told me, where there are no parts, only participants. So there's always someone in your system watching you take that edgy step. So that part, that everything we do ripples out, that part is certain. I will close then with a poem that I love, that helps me just to say it with you, a poem by Denise Levertov called Beginners. We have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How can desire fail? We have only begun. How can we tire of hope? So much is in bud. How can desire fail? We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy. We have only begun to know what it might be to live as sibling with beast and flower, no longer as oppressor. Yes, surely the river cannot already be, surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being. No, no, no. No, 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 not yet. There is so much broken that must be mended. There's so much that must be done for each other. We have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How can desire fail? How can desire fail? We have only begun to, so much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say that as you read that poem, I was thinking that today, walking down my driveway, I noticed that the Father Gilla is in bloom. Now, Father Gilla is a strange plant because it blooms now. And you go, why is it? There's not, the bees aren't out there. Yes, there is. There is one bee, kind of miniature bee, that depends on the Father Gilla. Even in this kind of still cold climate, it's already blooming. So the earth is providing. Yeah. So questions.
I hope they're questions. I covered so many things, I know, but I try to pack it in.
So if you have a question, we're open. You can put them in the chat, or you could just speak up, raise your hand, or just speak out. We're not that large that we have to manage it too much. Sure. Diane.
Okay, for Frankie, I realize that we're pack animals, but what I've noticed lately is that a lot of people, and our Surgeon General has pointed this out as an epidemic of loneliness and isolation, a lot of us are feeling disconnected. And that makes us feel helpless. So coming together like this and coming together in small groups like the women in India, I think helps us build courage together. So do you agree, or, can you say more?
Really, that is, if there's one takeaway, that is it for me. When, the story that I ended with, we found our courage. That's the main thing we want you to know, because we started coming together and taking initiatives ourselves, but together supporting each other. They each contributed a tiny bit. So I know that's been true throughout my whole life when I found others, and still today. Of course, in my work it's because I have a community that I work in. I can't imagine just being a lone author working out of my home. I know some people can do that, but I can't. So thank you, Diane. And I've been watching you I could see you while I was talking, and you really, you had an effect on me. So there you go. We are proving, you and I, we are proving together that the ripples.
And thank you so much,
You get me
because you
going.
have inspired me for at least 50 years. And
Wonderful.
the combination of a plant-based diet and living democracy, that's where we're going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Who else? Question, comment?
Rick, I don't have a question, but I wanted to, let's see if I could see myself here. I wanted to say that I dug up my original.
I see that. Wow, that's an
It's-
early one.
It is, and it reminded me, this is one of your ripples. It's the 14th printing in January 1975, and I remember reading when I was living in Monterey, California, and this led me down the path to becoming a vegetarian, which I've been for over 40 years. So thank you so much. I'm a huge
Thank you.
fan of yours.
And with your story, I don't know if I said this, but the last thing I thought I would become is a writer. I made a C on my first English paper in college. And so this theme of it's not possible to know it's possible, that we just, if we care enough, that's what I tell young people, find your question. And if you care enough, you will find a way to make a difference. And again, you'll never know the ripples. And so I always tell students about my C on my first English paper, hoping that will encourage them. Because with the help of a library, and I can never thank enough the Berkeley Ag librarians who helped me. And here I was just a kid, just a kid with a slide rule, and they just stayed with me, and these biggest questions I was asking. So I honor their memory so much too. So thank you, librarians, in the library.
Who else?
I guess I have a question. If we think about, agribusiness and the production of food and the whole strategy around that, as an individual, I can certainly change my diet, which I have, and to do that. But the question is, how do one begin making the impact that would change a business model that needs to be changed in order to grow more healthy food? I know that there are pockets of people who are redoing the land and stuff, but will it be in time? I mean, there's already water issues and the rationing of water, and yet are changing the fundamental cause for rationing water, or because they're still using huge amounts of it to grow what they're growing, eating what they're doing.
Well, I'm not going to surprise you. I'm returning to the theme of true democracy in our country, a democracy that's accountable to us, not to corporate lobbyists and corporate contributors. And to expose, we cannot do enough of exposing that is not democracy, to allow that. There's a wonderful organization called Open Secrets and you can read about, there are more agribusiness lobbyists than there are defense lobbyists, right? Most people would be very surprised.
Frankie,
Yeah, can't hear you.
there's a audio problem.
Huh. I didn't do anything.
Okay, you're back.
You're back,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Sorry. I don't, anyway, I'm back. What was that in the middle of a sentence, or
Yes.
that there's also an organization, Corporate Accountability, who I just respect them enormously, and they are all about exposing the what should be illegal intrusion of power, of corporate power, private power into our political system, but really putting limits on lobbying and putting limits on contributions from corporate entities. That is absolutely key to, and I think a lot of Americans would get that, right? That corporations aren't people, despite if you've heard that. And so I just feel that's so important, that piece of our puzzle.
I also have your book, this one from 1982. And I want to say, I keep referring to it all the time for the complementary protein mixing, which you don't
yeah.
see. And, I've gone from vegetarian, but now it's only like half the time. I eat chicken and fish probably half of the days of the week. So, but I do have a question to see how you would answer it. I'm not opinion one way or the other, but I do know a person who has an organic farm in Vermont who grows meat and sells meat. And he says his land, he farms it, but it's no good for anything else other than, grass for his cattle to graze on. And so he is not harming the environment by having a herd of cattle. How would you argue against him?
Well, I'm not an absolutist, but the big numbers are the big numbers, and an individual in a certain situation, we do what we have to do to survive, but it's really the system that leads to this concentration on a grain-fed, meat-centered diet that is the crisis. And maybe he can do, in his way of feeding, can learn more sustainable ways to feed the livestock and I'm not an expert on it, but I don't want to be, I don't know, an absolutist, I guess I'm saying here. It's really, it's really embracing people with not wagging fingers, but what can each of us do, and talking, in his life, what other things he can do. And I really, and this term, I wanted to ask you, John, what do you think of the term planetarian instead of vegetarian? In my talk, I said that since our diets, the diets that I'm talking about tonight with you, have these planet-wide impacts way beyond, not killing animals. What do you think of planetarian?
I think it might take a while for it to catch on and people understand it, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, because sometimes I think people think vegans and vegetarians, maybe they think we're self-righteous, and I don't feel that way. I feel like I'm doing what I want to do and not sacrificing at all. When I started moving away from meat, that's what I tell everybody. That's when I discovered how much I love food, because that's where all the variety was. And for me, when I stopped eating meat, I stopped craving, and I just started enjoying, so it was no sacrifice. So the more that we can put out a meme that isn't associated with holier than thou, and I thought, and the term planetarian, then somebody said, what does that mean? And then you could talk about 1,800 gallons of water for 1 pound of beef. And do we really want to work that way? So, but John, I really, really appreciate your asking a question, because I know I've been in your place. It's hard to know how to break into it. But I want to encourage all of you too, that I'm really easy to find. at my little office in Cambridge. And my email address is really easy to remember. It's just Francis at Small Planet. So all you know, I have to remember is the name of my book. And I'd love to answer any more questions or get your suggestions. And then you'd learn about the new book I'm working on now. So I just feel like I'm in a community of common seekers tonight. And so I want to keep that community going.
Thank you.
There's
You
a
are.
question in the chat, and then Sue Moses has a question.
Sharon.
The question in the chat is, do you think it makes sense to work? Oh, let's see. I have to read the whole thing. Thank you so much for the great inspiration. I want to see planet-based food more widely accepted and adopted in institutions, schools, hospitals, workplaces, etc. Do you think it makes sense to work at that level, or better to help government or individuals to discover the huge advantages of vegan diets or all of this?
Yeah, so I think again, it's what really lights your fire. And I know my daughter, who is now the executive director of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, Bragg Mom, that she many years ago, a decade or more ago, she was part of a movement that was succeeding, and even made a big dent in the Boston schools of helping cafeterias move just provide better, healthier food for their kids. And again, without wagging the finger at them. And I'm blanking on the name of that organization. I'm sure it's still going, but I could find it and share it with you, or you could probably find it online. But it was amazing how they worked with the school officials, but also with the cafeteria workers and the students, and it everybody was really into it, and so I think it's a great aspect of our work. And I think we make these choices in part because what we feel is most the root, and that's why I went to democracy, and my new book is, well, a lot of it will be about that, but we also make decisions of our choices based on where we have influence, right? And what gives us energy that we can sustain. So there are all these factors to not guilt trip ourselves for not doing the most important thing, because it's so hard to identify anyway, because everything is connected and the ripples we'll never know. So I just really glad you brought that up, because I think it's an entry point. I think of the entry points for change, and that's a powerful one, because the kids are, it's so important for young people to eat a healthy diet. It changes, it affects them for the rest of their lives. And it's also a point of community, of connection, where people get to know each other locally, and it might then trigger other things, community gardens and etc. So I really like that.
Hey, Sue?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a couple of years ago, my husband and I were driving through New Mexico and parts of Texas, where it was very clear that the economy is based on oil production. You see through the methane burning from the towers, cattle, and rest stops, which is trucking. So what struck me was the need to find a way to, these people's livelihood is based on these non-sustainable industries. So in speaking to people whose life is dependent on these, their economic life is dependent on these industries, I want to find a new way to talk to them, or to give them hope that there are ways for them to still live where they're living and make a living. And I don't know what the words are to speak to them about.
Well, I think engaging in a conversation, getting them to ask that question, and encouraging them, do they have other friends or acquaintances who are asking that question? And what if we all got together and thought, oh, if we all pooled a little bit here, then we could start something that we feel better about, just to encourage them that they're not alone, they're not bad people, they're doing the best they can. And then to encourage them to link to others who are making change and trying to help them find those connections so that you're not saying, oh yeah, that's what you're doing is bad. You got to change, but rather, oh, let's look for the opportunities. And so that's easy for me to say, but harder for you to do. But I think that that clearly, changes the nature of life right now. And a lot of communities are changing their income sources, their ways of production. And so and there was a whole period of, businesses increasingly moving into more rural areas I don't know how long ago, but so I don't know if that's a decent answer, but I'm so glad you have somebody able to talk to you. And it's quite, and wants change. And if hopefully maybe some of our writing could be helpful in helping, because we write for a non-academic audience, of course, that might help if any of our work, our books and reports could help, and blogs. So think about, we have really short pieces as well on our website.
Yeah, and change happens slowly. I think already people graduating from college would choose not to work in the oil industry just because they may not have a future. Small companies can't get loans to start. So existing businesses will flourish, but I think we're already stopping things from growing.
Right. And
I just
don't know
think
if you saw the news today that about depression, the epidemic of depression, and much more among the youth, that the most struggling are young people. And so, since those who would come to this tonight, I feel like you're all seekers, and you all, are looking for opportunities yourselves. And so to say, yeah, I get you, it's really, let's come together and bring a friend over and let's talk about what are the possibilities. So know that I think there are a lot of people yearning for doing things a different way, that the young people aren't just following what but they're depressed because they don't know where to go. So this is really accepting that that's totally understandable, right? And that there one could be doing something that works to bring bread to the table, and not being able to visualize something else, and it's frightening. So to really take that in and not judge, and then to open the ideas of what kinds of changes are happening elsewhere that we might do in your community. So yeah, this is I don't know if I'm going to sleep very well tonight, because it's very stimulating, because I feel so aligned with all of you have asked questions, were just the questions that I want to have better and better answers to. They're great questions, and I feel you gave me a much more of a sense of a community, that you're asking the same questions, and we, please, if you do get to go to our website and do read any of the material, any feedback about what worked for you, what didn't, and any changes you would make on how we present what we do, anything like that. And if you're ever in Cambridge, drop in. We're right in the heart, and very easy to get from the public transportation. We're not, 100 steps from the Harvard T. So I would love to have you come and visit. Just say sustainable stuff.
We might do that. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, no, if you wanted to, I mean, seriously, if you ever wanted to, we're so fortunate. We have this really sunny, big room that we can all sit around together. We have had it there regularly, something called the Boston Democracy Circle that meets there. And so, please, if you wanted to gather a group and just come and chat, and I might even give you a bunch of books. So please feel free to let us know if you'd like to drop in. I'd love to continue the connection.
Well,
Sue,
thank
do
you.
you have a follow-up question?
Yes.
No, okay. Just checking.
So I think we're done unless somebody has an urgent last question. I mean, there's much to be followed up on here, both in reading and in acting and in connecting with each other. So thank you.
Okay, can I end again with the words of Denise Levertov? Because
Yes.
it's everything to me.
Can you spell
We've
the
only
last,
begun-
can
What?
you spell her last name?
Levertov, and it's called Beginners.
Thank you.
We've only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in a communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. And it's springtime too.
Springtime.
Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you.
talk with us tonight. Great talk. Good to be with you.
Thank you, my great pleasure and great honor.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Sleep well.
Do you want me to stay on, or this is it for everybody?
This is it for us. Yeah.
Okay, you heard my great thanks. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.